So we finally get Cinder's backstory, and when I did my reaction, I was excited. I was thrilled because this is a character that has been around since the beginning. Since Volume 1, Episode 1, when she helped out Roman Torchwick. She was a big role in Volumes 2 and 3. She had her potential turnabout in Volume 4. She was a main villain in Volume 5, made a comeback in Volume 6, and of course has been a primary focus of the story since then. So I have a couple of characters I will compare her to in terms of her as a villain, as a character, because she is a main character of RWBY. She has been there since the beginning, alongside the likes of Ruby, Yang, Weiss, Blake, etc. So I'm going to preface this with a summary that I typed up, and then I'll go into more in depth with it. So bear with me while I get this summary out of the way, and then I will further elaborate on why Cinder's backstory is disappointing. So Cinder's backstory is something that we very much needed, given that she is a character who's been around since the very beginning. Prior to this episode, episode 6 of volume 8, excuse me, we knew less about her than virtually every other villain slash antagonist in the series, which, I'm sorry, not sorry, it's a mistake on the writer's part. It's a mistake on Miles and Carrie's part, and respect to the man himself, Montium, it was a mistake on his part as well. Now, obviously, I can't fault the guy since his tragic passing came about in the middle of their production of Volume 3, but Volume 4 was the perfect time for this kind of backstory. We could have seen her struggles, how they began, well, paralleling that with her current struggles with mastering her Grimoire, mastering the Maiden Power, and just trying to build herself back up, because we did see in this episode that she was struggling. She had a poor childhood. She was misused and abused. She was treated horribly. She had no friends, no one to look up to. But we didn't get that parallel that I just brought up. We could have really built Cinder as a main character. We could have established her as someone we could relate to, but for the better part of 7 volumes, she just wasn't relatable. She was not a good character. Cinder scenes on Volume 4 were more or less cliff notes on what she and Salem were up to, and Volume 5 regressed her character back to who she was in Volumes 2 and 3, so it effectively made anything that happened in Volume 4 null and void. After Volume 5, I was just either bored of Cinder or annoyed by her. She got better in 7, but that was due more on part of Jessica Negri's voice acting improving than my actual appreciation for the character. Where she is now in Volume 8 is a bit more of uncharted territory, since we don't really know where they're going with it, but I'm not holding my breath. So, which brings me to not the fact that not every villain needs a backstory. Tyrion, for example, works perfectly fine without that, and the way we got Watson's backstory sprinkled throughout the series, going as far back as Volume 3, since he is the creator of the Queen Virus, was probably one of the more well-done ways they've developed his character. Cinder, however, not so much, and she's more important to the plot and narrative, since she's more or less only beneath Salem in terms of being a main antagonist. She and Salem need deeper context to their characters so that we, the audience, understand their motivations, origins, drives, etc., just so we can at least have perspective. We don't necessarily need to relate to them, but in the case of Cinder, I would actually say she should be related to, because she's one of the more human antagonists that we have, at least on the face value of it. So, her backstory, at least the first half of her life, was shown to us, and, I was just happy that we're finally getting it. And after a bit of time and a rewatch with a couple friends of mine, I feel like it's safe and generic. It felt like the writers were just checking this off their list of things to do, and it didn't really make me more invested in her character. It's a serviceable backstory, sure, but that's about it. It has the surface story of Cinderella, but not the context behind why she was abused by her stepfamily. In fact, I was confused because I got the impression she was bought off the farm she worked at, not adopted. And if you pay attention to the end credits, the 2 girls that Madame has, they're called stepsisters, and it was very confusing. And of course, it's easy to hate someone who abuses children or fails to even function as a parent. Madame had no redeeming qualities, so the show made it really easy to dislike her, thus cheapening the sympathy I had for Cinder. And as for Rhodes, the huntsman, I don't care. I literally felt nothing when he died. I had no attachment to him. I didn't know anything about him other than, yeah, he was nice to Cinder, but were we given any reason to really care about him? No. And his death was almost comical because he dropped his weapons and then just got stabbed and then gave Cinder a head pat before collapsing to his death. It was weird. I think we should have gotten more time between them. And once again, Volume 4, this should have been done in Volume 4 as a parallel story to showing Cinder's drives and struggles. It would have made for a much better character for Cinder. Now then, I'm going to deep dive into everything I just said, give a bit more a closer examination of each character. So, in Volume 3, as I said, she's mysterious, manipulative, cunning, and she serves as like the big main antagonist. She's the big threat. She's the one we should be scared of. Not Emerald, not Mercury, not Roman, and not Neo. Cinder. And then, of course, in Volume 4, as I said repeatedly, we should have explored her backstory in parallel to her mastering the main powers. This was a perfect time because this was the big reset button for literally every main character, to include Jean, Ren, Nora, Ruby, Yang, Weiss, Blake, to an extent Crow, Oscar, Ozpin, and of course Cinder. It should have been done here, and it would have made for a better storytelling tool, and it would have made Cinder more relatable and more likable, at least in terms of being a character. In Volume 5, she regresses back to how she was in Volume 3, showing no growth as a character, which to me was a disappointing decision on the writer's end. Like, I'm sorry, if you like Cinder, that's fine, that's great. I don't. I find her annoying, I find her boring, and even this backstory, even though, like, I've been whining and complaining about it, been asking for a long time, I don't care anymore. It's too little too late for me. She is just simply not a good antagonist. Watts, on the other hand, is a very interesting character alongside, the likes of Tyrion, Roman, and a couple others that I'll get into. In Volume 3, that get the first signs of him when he made the Queen virus, which we retroactively find out in Volume 5 because we see the W on Leo Lionheart's desk. But we also see that W on Cinder's scroll in Volume 3, and we don't quite know what that represents. Like, what is that supposed to mean? And then we move on to Volume 5. I mean, he's introduced in Volume 4, but we don't learn much about him other than he just doesn't like Cinder. But Raven reveals that he's a disgraced Elysian scientist. Okay, that adds context to his character. That gives us a little hint of why he is where he is. Why is he a disgraced Elysian scientist? Did he kill somebody? Did an experiment go wrong? Did he do something illegal? Like, it makes you ponder things. Like, what's with this guy? What's going on with him? And then Volume 6, of course, he was barely in it, but we move on to Volume 7, where he was actually pretty much the main antagonist of that volume. I would even say secondary to Tyrion. Or above Tyrion, excuse me, not secondary to Tyrion. And then we learned that he supposedly died during what is called the Paladin incident. Okay, so what was the Paladin incident? It begs questions. Of course, we never really get anything about that, but it's not really that important. And then we do learn that he betrayed Atlas over his jealousy of Pietro because Ironwood chose Pietro's penny project over whatever Watts was trying to throw. And he is simply a man who seeks validation for his brilliance, and Salem was the one that gave it to him. So it makes him human. You can relate to this. You can understand that, like, he tried his best. He thought he was brilliant. He thought he was the best of the best, but other people decided, no, you're not. Somebody's better than you. And he couldn't accept it. His jealousy got the better of him. His pride got the better of him. And, the dude's got a brilliant mind. And it is a shame that, he went down the path that he went. He could have been a force for good, but instead he's quite literally working with the devil. And, of course, we know the devil doesn't really have the best interest for him. He's just a pawn. Salem more or less confirmed that in this episode when she said, oh, he's still proving useful. And then we move on to Tyrion, who's a bit more simple. He's the first threat that Ranger meets, and pretty much is the reason they get into the plot, which, RWBY didn't have a plot until Volume 4, when we learn about Salem, the relics, and more about the maidens. So yeah, Volume 4, he shows up, we're scared, Crow fights him, Crow gets injured, and then he escapes. And then we see that Salem just has complete dominion over him because, he like begs for forgiveness and then points out that he poisoned Crow, and even that wasn't enough for Salem to be happy with him. But I think that was a work of psychology on her part to not make him complacent, to make him try even harder next time, which in Volume 7, he does. And he succeeds in a big way. Not only does he cause Clover's death and frames Crow, but he escapes. He gets away with it, which means he succeeded more than Watts did, more than Cinder did. So of Salem's people, he's pretty much done the best. But we learned that he's a known serial killer throughout. I believe it was Anima. If I'm mistaken in that, please feel free to correct me in the comments. As well as a killer of huntsmen, which explains why Salem would want somebody with his talent. He's a killer. He has no remorse. He doesn't care about anything other than making Salem happy, which makes him incredibly loyal and a very useful tool for Salem to use. I would even consider him to be her most indisposable minion. Like, this is somebody she should keep around till the very end. And he works without a need for a deep dive into his history, motives, and psyche. He's just an interesting character in the way that he acts and the way that he does things. He doesn't need that in-depth character dive that somebody like Salem or Cinder would need. And, in saying that, he's secondary to Cinder and Salem. He is a secondary antagonist at best. Now, Hazel, yeah, fucking Hazel. If you were to ask me who the worst villain was, he's definitely in the running for it. It just is. Let's just get into this. So, in Volume 4, he seems to be in a more of a moral gray area since he helps out Oscar. He's a kid trying to get a ticket to, I don't know, maybe see his mom or something, and he just punches the ticket machine and it pops it out, and he's just like, yeah, don't let small obstacles get in the way of your path. Volume 5, his motives, yeah, here's the fucking onion. He's disappointing, it's generic, and it doesn't make logical sense for him to blame Ozpin when it was the Grimm that killed his sister. At least we think it's the Grimm, and then Salem's Master Grimm. You get it. And I'll even say this, Cinder is actually better than Hazel now because Hazel's just it was just disappointing. We'll just say that. Cinder, at least there's something to it. There's substance, but it's not very good, but it's better than what we got with Hazel. In Volume 6, he shows a protective side towards Emerald when Salem was angry and when he took the fall for Cinder's failure. So you could see that he's not selfish. He is a caring guy. He's not evil. He's just wounded. But it does make me still question why the fuck he's following Cinder. And I apologize for my swearing. I mean, I know I swear a lot in my channel, but I don't know. Thinking about Hazel, all the potential, just getting met with disappointment. It still grates on my nerves. But yeah, he's not an evil man. He's just wounded inside. He's in pain because he lost his sibling, his twin, supposedly, or younger sister. But there is that chance that he could switch sides because we've seen him have pause when he was interrogating Oscar. And now we get into what is arguably the worst antagonist of RWBY. The biggest letdown, most disappointing antagonist this show has had to offer. So he was introduced initially as possibly sympathetic because, he was fighting for the Faunus who were abused by humanity and all that good stuff. Or not good stuff, all of that, we'll just say stuff. And unfortunately, he just ended up being a psychotic and abusive asshole towards Blake. Like, that's it. That's his drive. He the Faunus deserving equality or perpetuating the genocide of humanity or enslaving them was secondary to his obsession with Blake because after Volume 5, he just kind of gave up and just said, you know what, I'm done. I'm just gonna go find Blake and kill her. Like that's it. And then I don't know. I guess we'll just wander off into the nothing and whatever. And then the fight between him, Blake, and Yang, it was fine. I did enjoy it. It was a good fight, and it was nice to see Yang get her comeuppance on him. But he was just disappointing, and it's arguably the most disappointing aspect of RWBY in general, or at least in terms of its villains. The only redeeming quality he has is his design, which even his secondary outfit that he got in Volume 5, I mean, as goofy as it looked with all the zippers and whatnot, I still thought he looked cool. He still gave me that Virgil vibe from Devil May Cry, but as a character, no. What were they thinking? This is by far RWBY's worst villain. So, for all you Cinder fans, know that I hate Adam more than I hate Cinder as a character. Adam, and I feel bad for Adam fans because I know a lot of people did like Adam, at least his design, and and people were particularly fond of him, if I recall, when Volume 3 was going around. It wasn't until Volume 6, I want to say, is when people were just tired of him. And when he died, I wasn't relieved for Yang and Blake. I was relieved because this abortion of a villain was gone. And I'm sorry if that sounds mean-spirited. I don't mean any hate towards the writers. It's just the way they handled Adam and the way they handled the Fauna storyline in general was just terrible. So, to really, I mean, I'm not trying to insult you with intelligence. It's obvious who these three represent. I mean, by these three, I mean Cinder, Madame, and Salem. Cinder being Cinderella, Madame being evil stepmother, and Salem being the fairy godmother. There were some people that said that Salem was a combination of the evil stepmother and fairy godmother, but no, I think it's safe to say she is simply the fairy godmother because she's giving Salem, or she's giving Cinder what she wants, albeit, being a strict, controlling person. She doesn't want Cinder to step out of line, but and she's figured out ways to kind of reel her in without having to necessarily punish her. So this is the part where I'm done comparing antagonists to her. I would have brought up Roman and Neo, but Roman and Neo are just good on their own. They're very similar to Tyrion in that they don't need a backstory to appeal to me or to be interesting, and we don't really need it. We just need them to do the things they're good at. Or Roman's dead, but Neo, like her expressions, her facial animations and whatnot, that really brings out the charm of her character. Like she doesn't even need dialogue, so therefore we don't need a backstory. But let's take a look at what Cinderella was like. What Cinder's inspiration, because this ties in strongly to Cinder's backstory, because it's quite literally a retelling of Cinderella, albeit with more blood and death than the original. So Cinderella was hated by her stepfamily because she was kind and beautiful, whereas they were ugly and cruel. They projected their shortcomings onto her. In Cinder's backstory, there's no explanation as to why this madam is so cruel towards Cinder. There's no reason behind it. It's not as if Cinder comes from a rich backstory or is her stepchild or anything like that. And I would say the same for the sisters, but I'm guessing they just take after their mother. Like that's a quick assumption that anybody could make about them. But there was no reason for this cruelty. Like, if Cinder were a faunus, I'd get it. In fact, that would make it a much more detailed story. And it would actually put her above Adam in other ways in terms of being a character. But there was just no reason for that cruelty on Madame's part. There was no context for it. We don't understand why it is. And it's not as if she was mean to other people. She was simply mean to Cinder. And we don't see her, how she treats the other servants. In fact, I think Cinder was the only one. So you're running this big hotel, but you only have one servant. It just didn't add up. Once I thought about it, it just didn't add up. But Cinderella, the story, even before Disney made their own version of it, it's a product of its time. Namely, how firstborn children of men were expected to inherit their parents' fortunes, whereas stepchildren were second in line to them. Like, this is why the stepchildren and the stepmother were mean to Cinderella, because Cinderella was pretty much first in line to inherit her father's stuff, and the stepmother was not happy with that. And that's just how times were back then, because it was mostly men had all the power, they had all the money, and they inherited stuff, and their firstborn children were typically the ones to inherit the whatever the parents had. And by firstborn, I don't necessarily mean like their firstborn child. I mean their first wife's children had more influence over who got what than the second wife's children, if that makes sense. But Cinder's backstory captures the surface value of Cinderella. Her I guess stepsisters are mean to her. Her quote stepmother is mean to her, but it doesn't do more than that. And a lot of people have told me that, and yes, I get it, Cinder is based on Cinderella, but if you look at how, Yang's based on Goldilocks, Ruby Red Riding Hood, Blake Beauty and the Beast, and Weiss is Snow White, we get allusions to those origin stories, but not literal retellings. And that's what makes some of these characters creative, and their backstories creative, their designs creative. Literally copy and pasting the story of Cinderella for Cinder's background is lazy. It's just filling in that void that's been there since Volume 4. And it doesn't do anything. It doesn't add value to Cinder as a character. It's just, okay, cool, we got the backstory, but it wasn't good. It was underwhelming. It was safe. It was generic. And it doesn't really capture the main reason behind the story of Cinderella and what the story of Cinderella was telling us behind the actions of the main character, the step parent, the step siblings, and the guy that she ends up with. I forget if he's a prince or not. I thought he was just some rich guy or something like that. But I haven't watched Cinderella since I was 10. I did watch the Disney live action version. I refuse to watch the Disney live action versions because I've heard they're all terrible. But yeah, I mean, just yay, we got Cinder's backstory, but it's underwhelming. Like, I was excited at first when I was doing my reaction video. In fact, I went at length talking about it. Fuck, my reaction was like almost an hour long, and I was kind of like, whoa, I'm gonna have to put timestamps in all this because I know you guys that watch my stuff, or if you just happen to be checking me out for the first time, like you're not gonna sit through all 55 minutes of me. So I'll definitely add timestamps. But yeah, Cinder's backstory, it's not good. I don't like it. And I think that pretty much seals it for me in terms of my like or dislike of Cinder. I don't care for Cinder anymore. I'm done. I still like the show. I still think Volume 8 is doing well, but Cinder as a character is just a really tremendous letdown. I mean, I'm glad we still have characters like Watts, Tyrion, and Salem, and of course, Neo, to carry the weight of being main villains. But Cinder was just. I don't think they handled Cinder very well. I think they've done this character a very big disservice, much like how they did with Adam, as I mentioned before, and to an extent Hazel. But I wasn't as invested in Hazel. Cinder's the villain that's been around since the beginning. She's the one that we should care about the most in terms of what's going on in the story and what she's doing as a character. But she's a letdown. She is a huge disappointment, and nothing that the writers do, in my opinion, can fix what's been done. You had the chance in Volume 4, you missed that window, you regressed her in Volume 5, and you had her you've had her consistently lose. But I get that that's a theme that her entire life is built on failure, and that's perfectly fine. But when you've got people turning that into like, I don't want to say necessarily like memeing it means it's bad. That's not exactly what I'm trying to get at. But when you make it laughable, like almost like a joke in of itself, then like I would take it more seriously if Cinder would reflect on her failures, if she would learn from them, and she hasn't. She simply has not learned from her failures, and that's disappointing. Cinder is a disappointment, and don't take a shot for every time I say disappointment, because I'm not trying to kill anyone here, but yeah, just I'm sorry. Like, if you like Cinder, I'm happy for you. If you think she's your favorite character or your favorite antagonist or what have you, I mean, more power to you. I'm glad you're enjoying her, but I'm not. I don't care for her anymore. She's boring at best and annoying at worst, and I just don't care. But yeah, I've gone on for a while now, and I've pretty much made all my points. At this point, I'd just be rambling, repeating myself again and again over the same stuff. But that's just my take on Cinder and why Cinder is the most disappointing part of RWBY as of right now. Anyway, I've been Luke of Light, and this has been me talking about Cinder's backstory, and see you all for whatever video I upload next. Have a good one.